Hello and welcome to the AniMonday podcast. My name is Colin Hempill.
And I'm Kayla Hempill.
On our show, we roll the virtual dice each week and must watch a randomly selected anime title. Thanks for joining us.
Hello, hello.
Today, we have, for the second time, it's been a while, a special guest in the studio today. Please welcome Josh Sheehy.
Hey.
Woo!
We've known Josh for quite some time. He was, of course, most importantly, one of the original AniMonday founders.
That's right.
I think it was kind of your concept in the first place.
Was it really?
Yeah, it seems right.
Man, that sounds like something I would do. I wouldn't put it past me.
But otherwise, Josh and I kind of do some music stuff together through Darkness, and he does some of his own through Skewfield.
That's right.
And we're glad to have him on the show.
Yeah, we're glad you came.
It is good to be here.
Especially because today we're talking about a great anime series.
Yes.
And sorry, I've already been spoiling it on Twitter and Facebook and everywhere that we kind of already like this show. So last week we hit the random button on Crunchyroll, and the show that appeared is called Cells at Work. Cells at Work began as a manga series in 2015 and is still ongoing. There were several spin-off manga series, such as Bacteria at Work in 2017, Cells That Don't Work in 2017, Cells at Work Code Black in 2018, and Cells at Work Friend in 2019. Finally, there was the anime series that we watched in 2018 that was produced by David Production, and it ran for 13 episodes with a second season now confirmed and in progress.
Whoop, whoop.
We watched the first 4 episodes of the first season, and we'll try to avoid any kind of major stuff, but it's pretty episode to episode in this one. Kayla, would you like to talk about the plot?
Absolutely. Among the 37 trillion cells in your body, one little red blood cell is working hard for you. Her life is filled with nutrient deliveries, avoiding deadly bacterial attacks, and making new friends. She's happy to do it, though, because working is what cells do.
So all of us have seen most or all of this show.
Yes.
Yes.
We will kind of try to stick to the first 4 episodes in the kind of plot and characters that we saw in those episodes. But for the most part, this is a very character-driven show because the rest of the show is biology, which is kind of an unusual thing that we haven't really encountered on AniMonday before. Even in not specifically biology, but like an educational sort of show.
Yeah, this is definitely different in terms of tone for the show, that there's a lot of surprisingly accurate information that is going on in the show.
I think this show, though, really excels at how well it does at portraying those educational factors. None of this, even when they're just monologuing about like what a particular cell does in the body, it doesn't feel out of place, and it still fits really well with the characterizations of those parts of the body.
Yeah, it feels secondary to what's going on in the show itself.
The first episode, we talk about the pneumococcus, and it's basically like the introduction to the idea of bacteria, or like the bad guys in this show. And there are the cells who are just trying to get their job done, and then there are cells who defend the rest of the cells by violently slaughtering the bacteria that invade this body. From there, the second episode is about a scrape wound that the human body endures, and all of the bacteria that invade at that moment, and then how the body heals itself in that process. And then we talk about influenza, which I'm sure everyone is familiar with.
Especially this time of year.
And then the fourth episode is about food poisoning, but specifically it's about like eating raw fish and ingesting a parasite and stuff like that. So it's a real fun episode.
Something I love about this show is that this is actually a slice of life show. Yeah. For these cells, which is funny because you are usually very opposed to slice of life shows, and yet something about this show and this formatting really works.
Yeah, I guess I tend to find that there just has to be some sort of hook that works really well. in the case of Nishijo, it's that it's not actually normal in any way. And in this case, it's because it's, personified cells in the body. There just has to be something weird about it, I guess. So I guess let's jump in there and talk about some of the characters that we experience in this show.
Yeah, so the main... I would say of the main two characters, the first one that we'll talk about is the red blood cell.
Yeah, and I guess it's worth noting, like, anytime we talk about a singular character, we're actually talking about probably a whole lot of characters, because there's obviously a whole lot of red blood cells that we see in this show. It just kind of focuses on one particular one, and so we refer to her as the red blood cell.
She does actually have a very small identification number.
Right.
Yeah, I did not bother to learn those numbers at all.
No.
Hers is AE3803.
Right.
I'm really happy for her for that.
Yeah. I am glad that, like, and I'll probably talk about this later, this show isn't... It's kind of like presenting itself as an office place kind of slice of life, because that's actually a pretty common anime, is where... It's about people, like, just having normal jobs and having, like, coworkers and that sort of stuff. And this show, despite her having, like, an ID sort of number, they never, like, refer to her by that.
Yeah, I think the only time they ever refer to the numbers is when the white blood cells are talking, like, on their walkie-talkies. Is that what they have?
Yeah.
Walkie-talkies?
Yeah, that sounds right.
I was trying to remember if they had anything fancier than a walkie-talkie, but I'm pretty sure that's all it is.
I love her character because she is our quintessential ahoge character.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing I love about her is that while she does kind of play that, like, clueless, maybe, like, dumb role, like, she often gets lost, she goes, against the natural flow of the body, she has a lot of redeeming moments. She's not just, like, dumb for the sake of being dumb and then they throw her away. That's not the whole of her character. It's a part of who she is. But there's so much more to her personality. She's really caring and she is really hardworking. And I think that's something that endears me to her, is that while she is kind of the driving force of the show, that a lot of information gets passed through her to us because she doesn't know something, is I don't feel like they're trying to make her be us.
Yeah, and I actually like the kind of joke they make out of it, her being a red blood cell who's directionally challenged, which is really, like, her main flaw. It's not that she's necessarily, like, dumb, like you were saying. It's just that she doesn't know how to get around the body, which turns out to be a great plot device for learning about everything in the body.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that is an interesting direction, because obviously her only role in this show as, like, a job function is that she carries stuff from one place to another, and traveling the entire length of the body, we kind of learn all of those different routes, and hijinks ensue at various places in the body.
Mm-hmm.
I think the important counterpart to her is the neutrophil, and he is very interesting himself.
Yeah, the white blood cell kind of shows up right off the bat when the red blood cell encounters a bacteria that has invaded the body, and it wants to kill everything and spread itself throughout the body, and the white blood cell is obviously tasked with destroying that invader. And he kind of comes across as the, like, a little bit emotionless, kind of strong guy sort of vibe, but he ends up encountering the red blood cell repeatedly throughout the show.
Yeah, and I really love their dynamic because he brings out the red blood cell's bravery. Like, she ends up putting herself in situations that she doesn't need to be involved in because that's not her job function. But she brings out this kind of kindness and nurturing in him. Like, he does go out of his way sometimes to care for her and to, like, make sure that she's okay.
Yeah, like the first interaction they have together, it's at the very beginning of the show. she's just explaining. It's basically explaining that red blood cells deliver things, and then this germ pops out, and then the white blood cell. First lines, die germ, very bloody, kills the germ, and then they're just kind of standing there, and she's like, oh, like, thanks for saving me. And he's like, it's just my job. And then there's like this comedic pause, and he's like, oh, actually, yeah, no, you're welcome. Like, yeah.
Yeah, it's as if this is the first person who's actually like thanked him for doing what he is born and bred to do, I guess. So they do end up having really fun interactions together, and they're really sweet. And it's kind of what drives the show is this enduring relationship between the red blood cell and the white blood cell, and all the other cells that they meet along the way.
And there's a lot of them, so I don't know how much in depth each of you want to go with them, but we'll just kind of go through them. So one of the cells they encounter are the killer T cells.
Yes.
Yes.
Killer T cells being another form of white blood cell. And all of these characters wear like black, I guess almost suits, like dress shirts and pants almost. But then they've got a cap on that just says kill on it.
And they're all super buff.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, whereas the white blood cells, or the neutrophils at least, all appear to have knives to kill germs. The killer T cells just punch things. They just have muscles to punch things, and that's how they take care of business.
We also similarly encounter the naive T cell, which kind of fills a similar function and hangs out and trains with the killer T cells. But he appears as like a teenage kid who's like really afraid to do anything. And then when the moment kicks in, he transforms into the super buff character and multiplies and then is able to just destroy everything in his path.
I thought it was interesting that when we first encounter him, he actually is carrying a knife, which is not like the other killer T cells. So it just shows like his displacement in his role, and when he gets activated, he really embraces his inner killer T cell.
Yeah, that plot line is one of my favorite in the entire show. I watched that episode over and over. I also really want a hat that just says naive across it.
Yeah.
of all the this is a very merchable show, and of all the merch that I could get out of this, a naive cap would be great.
In these early episodes, we briefly meet the macrophage.
These are probably my favorite white cells because they're like my favorite kind of trope, which is she appears in these super frilly, like kind of beigey white dresses. She has like this long, braided hair, but she like carries this huge hatchet that she just tears through germs with, and she's always like smiling, and there's these cute little sparkles around her, and it's hysterical. I cannot stop laughing.
Yeah, it's essentially like a Buster sword, pretty much.
Yeah, they definitely call it a hatchet in the show, and I'm just sitting there. I'm like, there's gotta be a better word for this than hatchet. This thing's massive.
I like the macrophage also seems to like work out of a church or something.
The spleen.
Yeah, the spleen is a church.
It's a pristine, clean
Yeah,
church.
right.
Yes.
And there's nothing better than that for the spleen.
Yeah, and we'll talk later about like the violence in the show being especially funny. But the macrophage like goes out of her way to avoid getting blood spattered on her or anything.
Which is in direct contrast to the neutrophil, who is all white in nature. Like his hair's white, skin's white, all his clothing is white. And when he destroys a germ, he gets covered in... It's red, but in theory it can't be blood.
Well, okay, we'll get into that later.
That's a little unclear. But he is no longer white, whereas she pretty much stays pristine. Some of the other cells that we encounter are the helper T cells. We only get a little bit of, well, I guess it's him. I don't know if there's other ones, but we get like a few little glimpses of the helper T cell.
Yeah, he kind of acts as like a commander. He kind of overviews things that are going on throughout the body and alerts the different white cells and helps them with valuable information.
Also, if you've gotten the chance to see Colin's like anime character, this helper T cell pretty much looks like that. It is Colin to a T.
Yeah, I guess I found my new cosplay, which is I don't have to do anything.
Yeah.
Similarly, we also have the memory T cell, who like carries around scrapbooks, and we saw this one in particular. It was decorated with hearts, and it looked like a Valentine's Day card almost. And basically, his whole job is to look at the memory scrapbook and go, "Oh yeah, I remember how to fight these things." And the best part about this character is he doesn't actually participate at all. He just kind of writes down what he's seen before. And then as soon as he says the thing that he remembers, he flexes and he shows off. And all the other T cells are like, "Yeah, go memory cell. You're the best. We love you." A few more that I'll burn through pretty quickly. We've got the B cell, which produces antibodies, and he carries around a big cannon that he produces antibodies and shoots them. We've got the dendritic cell, which is like, he's kind of like a communication mechanism that coordinates between the different cells. He lives in a tree and takes phone calls. It's pretty fun. We briefly meet the eosinophil, and we've gone back and forth on the pronunciation of that. We're not biologists. Which is essentially a really rare type of white cell, and it is specifically suited for fighting off parasites.
Mm-hmm. And allergens. Yeah.
Yeah, so we see this character kind of struggling with like the most basic kinds of bacteria, but when this huge worm shows up in the body, she just destroys it with like a pitchfork.
It's amazing.
I would like to briefly talk about one of my favorite characters.
I know which one this is.
The basophil.
Yes.
Who is kind of the Batman character, just like brooding and depressing. It's interesting. They talk about in the show how like we don't actually fully understand everything that this cell does. So they make him kind of a mysterious character who talks in weird like poetry and is just kind of odd. So he says things like, "His tremendous will has led the sorrowful warrior to sacrifice himself. To seal away the corruption of the world, it is time to let the bloody requiem ring out." And doesn't contribute anything, by the way. Doesn't help.
No.
Even in show, like, most of the cells have no idea what he's talking about, and they're just like... But he carries around an umbrella with him, which I think is great, which we only ever see him hanging around, like, the stomach. So could just be for stomach acid, but also he shows up when there's allergen stuff going on, so it could be the histamine that he's using that for. But I really like his umbrella.
Yeah.
We have to talk about the most important characters.
Yeah, this is like one of the rare ones where the entire group matters way more than one individual of the group.
And that's the platelets.
They're so cute.
They're the best.
So platelets, practically, like what they do is help form blood clots. And they end up saving the day in episode 2 because there is a skin abrasion that lets in a bunch of bacteria. And they're able to cover the wounds and form a clot. But all platelets are depicted as little kids.
Yeah, when everybody else is depicted as being older, these are just these small, cute little kids in these cute little rain boot things. They're so cute.
Wearing these shirts that are too big for them.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And hats. The hats are really good on
the
them,
hats,
too.
they have
messenger bag.
They have this just great aesthetic uniform that they wear and music that accompanies them, and the way they're depicted is just the cutest way you can depict anime kids. Because like I said, they have a huge role in the second episode and basically save the entire body when nobody else was able to win against these bacteria. and these little kids just do their march, carrying their equipment with them, and save the day.
Yeah, what I love about the platelets is that while they are depicted as being really childish, they're not helpless. They have their role and they work just as hard as everyone else. It's just that they're like smaller and cuter than everyone.
And they have a real hard time going downstairs.
I really love that scene. They play it off like, so there's a whole bunch of platelets carrying a big old box of something, and there's just stairs in front of them, and they have to stop everybody, and they're like, look out, we got to be careful up ahead. And then they like zoom in on one of the lead platelet's legs as she's like sidestepping down these stairs, and then it pans out and she like breathes heavily, and then the stairs are like, it wasn't hard at all. It was just like,
it's like 4 steps.
yeah. But then all the platelets follow suit, and they're all super excited when they get all the way down the stairs, even though it wasn't really a big deal.
And the best part is, like, all the other characters in the show acknowledge this the same way that the viewer does. So when the red blood cell and even the white blood cell, who is usually pretty, straight-faced and not really reactive to things, they both look at the platelets and go, oh, that's so cute. And the whole time they're like cheering on the platelets to help them, get down the staircase and things like that when they have simple tasks to do.
Yeah, it's great. Like the same way that you would just pause and be like, look at these platelet characters. They're so cute. Everyone in the show just stops. They're like, they could be hunting down a germ. They're like, we got to get to the lungs, or this disease is going, or like, this pathogen's going to spread throughout the body. And then they're just like, oh, platelets. Oh no, they're in trouble. Oh, they're so cute. Look at them fall down. Like, oh man.
I think we've all collectively decided that our kids are going to be dressed as platelets for Halloween.
Yeah.
Yeah, good family cosplaying right there.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, now that we've talked about stories and characters, we're going to take a quick break. We'll come back and talk about production.
Welcome back. Let's start off our production conversation about the animation, the characters design, and the music.
I guess to start off on character designs, the very first thing that you see in the show is pretty much a bacteria. And if you didn't know any better, you might think you were watching a Dragon Ball or something. It comes across as very shonen, like this looks like a villain from, one of Frieza's minions, basically. And I'm sure it'll come up at some point. The production studio for this also does JoJo, and a lot of characters kind of share similarities with that as well.
Yeah, when it comes to the difference between the cells in the body and the foreign bacteria, is that they really try to make it clear that these germs are definitely foreign to the body. They don't look like any of the other characters because the cells in the body look like people, different kinds of people, different shapes and that sort of thing, but all still very much people. Whereas when the germs come in, they kind of range from all different type of monstrous forms.
Yeah, I think even more than like the fact that the quote unquote good cells in the body look like people is they all have uniforms. You can tell a cell and its role specifically by the clothes that it's wearing. I would also say in terms of the bacteria designs, sometimes they do try to mimic their like real world appearance, at least to a certain degree, because, cells and bacteria, some of them have kind of a look to them, but otherwise they're kind of blobs.
Something I started noticing as we were going through the episodes again was that it seemed like the more complicated the germ, the more details there were to the germ in the show. So if the germ in the real world is kind of like a simple celled kind of organism, that's how they would appear. They'd almost be kind of like your RPG slime sort of thing. And the more advanced they are and the more deadly they are, the more they actually started to look more humanoid in nature.
Yeah, especially when you get to like the parasite that they meet later on. Like that's a nematode that you can actually see with the naked eye. And so when it appears in the body, it's not only huge, but it's way more detailed and way scarier looking than anything else you've seen.
Yeah, Colin and I were looking up photos of it.
Don't do that.
Agreed, don't do that.
Also, never eat fish, I guess.
Yeah. No.
It's funny, you'll like occasionally on the news see a story about like some person in East Asia who ate so much sushi like every single day of their lives. That was the only thing they ever ate. And they'll get something like this, but I don't think it's actually that like common. Like a normal person wouldn't typically get this from eating fish.
As long as they're discerning about where they get that fish from.
Right. But this is a very unfortunate body.
Yes. But it does make me wonder, with the exposure to those germs, like, I mean, that has to kind of be that common. Something about this show is that the white blood cells, the cells in the body actually are pretty successful in fending these things off. And it just kind of made me think, like, is this body that unfortunate, or is this like the normal thing? Like I get scrapes and bruises, like that just happens. And yeah, there's gonna be like some amount of germs that are gonna come in, and I likely won't actually get sick from them because I'm a generally healthy person.
Yeah, the one thing is they do get type A influenza though, and I don't know
Right.
how common that is. I don't think you. Yeah.
No.
But also that's really weird because it's just like that's kind of how the episode goes. Like they don't really resolve type A influenza at all. They're just like, yeah, and then we got type A influenza, and then that's how it went.
I think it was used more for like the educational aspect.
Yeah. I was really fond of the type A influenza showing up, and like they're like, oh, it must be type A influenza, and then they like zoom in on its like head, and it's just got like a little A there, and they're like, yep, that's what it is.
And then it grows a huge beefy arm and turns into a monster.
Yeah. Something that I really enjoy about the characters themselves is that there are so many different like kinds of cells, but even when we're looking at the red blood cell and the neutrophil, like there are millions of these cells. And so you'll see shots where our main character red blood cell is amongst a lot of other red blood cells, and they did a really good job of like adding little details to each of them so that they do look individual. They aren't copies of each other, even if they're wearing the same uniform. So you can tell what the cell's job is by their uniform, not that they're just copy and paste sort of characters.
Yeah, I do want to talk about one of my favorite character design things here, which is the neutrophils receptor.
Oh, yeah.
So the neutrophils all wear hats, and attached to these hats are receptors that tell them when pathogens or anything nasty is nearby. And it's just a stick with a circle on the end. And when it's nearby, it makes this kind of dinging noise, like a cell phone or something like a text message notification.
It's like a bad metal detector or something.
and then it just flips straight up. So normally it's on the back of the hat and it's just like hanging straight down, and then it just flips straight up. So like really, really great, just all running around with these like kind of popsicle sticks with with like a target on top of them. And then they just pull out their knives and stab everything.
Yeah, it's a funny contrast with this character because, as we've said, it's such a stoic character. And this thing pops up and starts beeping. And it's kind of like what you would consider a cute feature of the character. And then they immediately rampage like, where's the enemy?
Yeah. I also like that the first time you see the receptor pop up and they explain it, red blood cell is immediately like, is that really the best design for that?
Yeah. The only other note I had on character design is that we see like a kind of generic cell that wears like a plain white shirt and it just says cell on the front. And we kind of don't get a whole lot of interaction with those. And then we get the red blood cells, which are kind of the most other common component in the show. And both of those kind of generic cells have both male and female versions. And they kind of look like anything. A choice that they made in the show is that every other role is also gendered. I don't know if there's anything necessarily to say about that, aside from like white blood cells come in different forms, like we talked about the macrophage versus the killer T cells or something. So I don't know if it's just like a distinction thing where they're trying to make everything really obvious what the role is.
Yeah, it seems like when you start branching out into some of these lesser seen characters, like maybe you'll see them in like every few episodes or something like that. They want to make it really clear that, oh, that's a macrophage and oh, that's a killer T cell, so that you can tell by the uniform and the design of the character, even if there's those little detail differences, that this is their role and this is the thing that they're about to do.
Right, so if you had a male macrophage, you couldn't reuse the same costume necessarily. And so you'd have to introduce two character designs for the same role, which would make it confusing to keep track of those.
One of my other favorite things that's done in this show is the different ways that they personify different parts of the body. So not only are these characters like personified cells, is that the actual like organs and just the world itself has been built to resemble our world. So instead of there being like the ventricles or something like that, you see like tunnels and walkways. And my favorite thing that they do is that they add real life functionality for things that happen in the body. So there's different like tunnels that the red blood cell can, use in order to get to different parts of the body, but then she'll end up going the wrong direction and there'll be like a gate that like pops up and is like, whoa, you can't like enter this way. Blood flow doesn't go in this direction.
And an attendant will yell at them.
Yeah, and I love that they add those real, like, that's a real thing that happens in your body, that it would be very detrimental if like your blood flow was to change in that direction. And I love that they have these like little details in the show to personify those things. And it's just that sort of like educational thing again of like, hey, there's all these like aspects and they don't always address them. They'll just kind of say this like one line of, hey, like you can't go that direction. That's the way to, like to this artery that you can't go down or something like that. And I love that those little details. A character thing that they do with the neutrophil that I also love is that as part of being a white blood cell is that white blood cells have an easier time like moving through different like walls in the body. I was a little unclear exactly what that was, but that's personified as he is able to like get through like narrow alleyways, or he can like travel through like air ducts in a building.
I mean, he basically is Sam Fisher at that point. He just climbs through air vents and like jumps into corners and yeah.
But I love that that's based off of like a real aspect of his type of white blood cell.
And he'll use that against his enemies too. Haha, you didn't do your research.
And they do actually say that.
Yeah, I like how also with the migrating cell, it like gets more ridiculous every time they use it. So like the first time it's like, yeah, he pops out of an air duct and you're like, oh, that's interesting. And then the second time he like pops through like a 6-inch gap between two walls in an alleyway and his like boot gets stuck and he has to go get it back. And just like, how did you do that? And he's just like, migrating cell.
Yeah. We had also briefly mentioned the gore in this show, which in terms of animation is pretty funny in the way that they're using it. It's kind of similar to like Magical Girl Ore, where the violence was over the top for this kind of purpose. And you had said like how the character, especially the neutrophil, is completely white, and so when he destroys something, he's completely covered in blood. But additionally, like when they kill a bacteria, its eyes go like crosses, like, you know, I'm trying to think of what that originates from. I guess cartoons.
Yeah. Yeah, they have these big blocky X's over their eyes. It's hysterical.
So they do little touches like that throughout to keep everything really lighthearted and energetic and fun. Despite the fact that like this show is about disease and injury and things like that. And so I think they do a good job of utilizing the animation to enhance that kind of mood and to keep it fun and light, but maintain the educational kind of purposes.
Yeah, there's a really interesting line they walk between stabbing everything and blood just squirting everywhere, and also it being like really hilarious when they do that. And it's hard to find animation that can do both of those things at the same time. Like usually if you're going to have this much blood in an anime, it's usually not going to be for comedy. But they make it work, and it is funny.
I'm still curious if it's actually blood.
They call it blood at least in the subs. Like it shows up like because red blood cell gets like a little on the back of her hand or something, and they straight up are like, "Oh, you've got blood on yourself."
Whole can of worms there.
I think it works great as a gag because it's another one of those things where they're like, okay, yes, there's biology going on in this show, but we're like, this is not edutainment or anything like that. It's still an anime, and like, yeah, the cells are gonna bleed because we can.
Mm-hmm.
I have 4 words for you all. Kill hat screen wipe.
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
Man, yeah, they do that early on too. The transitions for this show are beautiful. They do at least one for the neutrophil hats as well. The kill hats and the neutrophil hats transitions happen pretty close to each other. I don't know if I noticed any others that were as good as that, but those two are really, really good.
We've talked before when it comes to anime music about how one common thing that we see is that rather than licensing some sort of popular music for the show, they will basically hire out the voice actors for the show and compose some original work based on this particular anime. This one is no exception. The introduction is basically a song about how, like, we're so happy to be working in your body and helping you out. And it's sung by mainly the red and the white blood cells.
If you ever get the chance to listen to the English dub of it, it's super adorable. And it actually, like, makes me feel good. It makes me feel like they're singing to me and telling me how much they love me. And I think it's adorable.
Yeah, I think I usually kind of hammer on this because it's usually they're just not good songs. And I think that's the biggest problem, is not even that, like, I mean, in this case, the white blood cell cannot sing very well. It's not great, but that makes it all the more enduring when you know that character, because it's so out of his like personality to even start singing that the fact that it kind of sounds uncomfortable makes it really fit with the character. And I think it's actually a really fun song, and they managed to do something pretty cool for the intro. Yeah,
the way that each of the characters sing, it's very indicative of their character. Like, even the neutrophil, when he's singing, he's kind of yelling. Like, he's kind of yelling at you, but it's like him saying, like, I'm working for you and I'm taking care of your body. And it fits in the song so well that I think it's more about, like, the characterization of that rather than, like, we're singing a song that has nothing to do with our show, but we're singing it, and that's how it ties into the show.
Right.
It's also very catchy, and I sing it a lot.
She does.
It is a very catchy song. So I didn't have time to, I wanted to look through and listen to all the different music they had for each of the characters, and I didn't really have time to do that. But the one that I did go back and listen to is the platelet theme, which is, very appropriately adorable. It's kind of like toy instruments playing carnival music is what comes to mind. It's very playful and very cheerful and happy, which is a complete contrast to what's usually going on in the show. And so it really stands out compared to a lot of the other music, which all blends really well with the show and is overall really high quality addition to the show.
Yeah, I don't know that anything kind of stood out in the rest of the characters. It's probably a fine line, especially focusing on the platelets was probably a great idea to really enhance the music there. I'm thinking like if every scene with a killer T-cell was like metal and they just came onto the scene and there were squealing guitars and like heavy drums, it would have been funny once.
Right.
But they show up so frequently that I don't know that it would have worked. And so they seem to kind of stick with the same themes generally for the rest of the show.
And the overall world theme is really good. If you just like sit and listen to it, it's this kind of driving. It does make me think of like industrial work. It just makes me think of like some 1950s like commercial about the future and how great the industry like is going to be in the future. That's what it makes me think of. It's this very like light and bouncy kind of music, and it really sets the tone for the world because most of the world as you're looking at it is like it's very bright and it's like very clean and like everyone is pretty happy, and the music really reflects that in a way that still has the same kind of tone, which is everybody's working. And I think that overworld music that you hear pretty much at the beginning of every episode, you can hear the world music come in, and I think it's really great for the tone of the show.
Cool. As we start to wrap up our discussions, I'd like to toss it over to Josh and see if you would like to talk about some of your general thoughts for the show and whether you had any overall likes and dislikes.
Yeah. So having an anime that's about cells in a human body and the cells themselves kind of look like people is a pretty unique idea, but it's been done before.
Do tell.
So I'm sure many of you who are listening probably know about the animated movie Osmosis Jones. It came out when I was, I think, in my early teens. I didn't look up the year for it because I'm lazy. But I do remember Osmosis Jones, and I remember distinctly not liking it. Not really hating it or anything. It had a lot of good actors and actresses doing voice work for it, and also had live action in it, which I'll get to in a moment. But just didn't really reach the potential of what anthropomorphic cell, human body cell animation could be. When I first heard about Cells at Work, that's, of course, the first thing I thought of was like, man, I really didn't like Osmosis Jones. This better be better. And fortunately, within like the first 5 seconds of watching this, I was like, oh, this is incredible. And then I was just waiting for live action to creep in it and Bill Murray to show up in my least favorite role for him ever and ruin everything. And it doesn't happen. Like, I'm sorry for the spoilers, but that doesn't happen. It's all animated. It's great. And overall, like, I'm usually not really interested in learning about biology or anything kind of vaguely medical related, but this show handles it in a way that kind of divorces it from keeps it away from a medical context, and it's not also from like a really stingy kind of we're learning about biology right now kind of sense. And so you end up learning things, and since a lot of them are visual gags or like audio gags, like they stick with you. So I probably learned more about biology watching the show just in a general sense by watching a few episodes of this than I would have picked up otherwise. So that's going pretty good for it. As far as like dislikes, there's not a whole lot, but they do a lot of exposition throughout the show, and they'll bring up a still of whoever's whatever germ they're introducing or cell that they're introducing, and they'll talk a little about that. And for the most part, they do a really good job of not killing the pacing on it. But in episode 2, Scrape Wound, there is a lot of exposition. There's like 4 germs they introduce pretty close to each other, and there's other things that they stop for. And that was... now I'm used to it. I've watched the first 4 episodes several times now, and because I kept introducing friends to it. And now I'm used to it, and I don't care as much. But the first time I watched it, I was just like, is this episode ever going to stop telling me things about it and just do them? Because there are occasions where they'll put text on the screen. Since I'm watching subs, they'll put text on the screen and it'll just go away, and I'm like, okay, that's fine. If I really wanted to learn what that is, I'll pause it and I'll go read it. But when they actually do the full stop, like tell you about this character, the text is all on the screen and they read out all the text on the screen, and it can sometimes kill the mood. And I was worried that it was going to do it more, but fortunately they seem to have a pretty good hold on that, and they don't throw too much at you at any given time.
Yes, especially as you're introducing fewer distinct characters episode to episode, so I think that over time does get better.
It seems like the reason why they do some of the exposition is to help you understand the characters better, like their roles in the body help explain like some of their personality. And so while I agree, like there is an educational aspect to it, is because the show isn't trying to be educational, is it ends up being kind of used as a character device. So I find myself wanting to know like what it's saying in the screen so that I can understand that character better. And yeah, as you guys were saying, as we get introduced to fewer new characters and we just revisit the same characters, is that doesn't happen as often, and so the pacing, gets kind of back on track.
Yeah, and I don't want to like harp on this as like a really bad thing about the show, because they really do handle it well. It just kind of peaks really early on in the show, which makes sense, but also like if you were sitting there not sure if you were going to go to episode 3 and they were just going to keep doing this, it might just feel a little off. But in general, yeah, that leads me to one of my other thoughts about the show, which is that they do a really good job of picking when to be accurate and when to be an anime. And that's a really hard thing to do, especially if your whole show is going to be about cell biology.
Yeah, as I kind of researched like a little bit of info about this show, I had kind of seen Twitter ramblings and various people talking about how accurate this show actually is. I've yet to find like real kind of peer-reviewed sort of stuff or anything really scientific. Most of this shows up in like anime websites, and they talk to a scientist or a biologist or a researcher of some kind. But generally, like, this stuff is pretty accurate from what I can tell. To the point that like biology teachers in a few places have actually assigned this as homework to their students. But I think it's kind of like what Kayla was saying, that the way that they choose to characterize those little minute details about a particular cell or a particular function of the body is really fascinating. And it helps you to kind of think of those functions in a different way. And it does that by being a funny anime. And I think that balance is really, really charming in this show.
Yeah, I think especially for kind of the depth that it goes to on trying to be accurate, balanced with the amount of violence and stuff in this. If I was a biology teacher in like high school, I would totally do whatever I could to just be like, I would play this in class, as assuming the school would let me. And if I couldn't play it in class, then I would just tell kids to go watch it, because I do think it's good at what it does. It's certainly good enough to get students curious about these kinds of things and think of it as interesting and entertaining, rather than, I took biology in high school and slept most of the time. So if I had this, I don't think I would have become a biologist, but I would have been a lot more interested.
Yeah, I think something that I kind of get reminded of when I would like have to watch like The Magic School Bus. And this is kind of on the opposite end of the educational spectrum, is that The Magic School Bus was designed to educate you about a thing, and those students are used as a means to like, you're also those students and you're on this adventure too. And they're separate from the things that are happening. They're observing the things that are happening. And these characters are living this out. We are watching their day-to-day experience. And it's so immersive in that way. And I think that's what really works about this show, is that it's not trying to shove something down your throat. It's just saying like, hey, come join these cells in their lives and look how hard they're working. And something that I really love is each of these characters is that I care about this red cell, like blood cell. I care about her. And it's funny because she will point out, even in the first episode, how she is one of this huge crowd. And yet, like, she is so distinct in my mind, you know, and I can remember each of these characters, and I can remember like what their actual job functions are, is because they do such a good job of not only teaching me about the job functions, but making that secondary and making that so much a part of their personalities, and making each of their personalities so distinct and just enjoyable to experience, that I find myself caring about, you know, AE 3803 red blood cell because she's special in this regard, and I think this show just does a really good job of making these characters really lovable.
Yeah, I think the first time watching this show, and now that I've watched it several times, I think one of the strongest things this show has going for it is, if you don't know anything about biology, or at least cell biology, which I didn't, then there are plot reveals every episode. And so, like, I don't know what dendritic cells do at all. So it's amazing when I get to see a plot reveal related to that, and it turns out to be hilarious. If you did know about biology for cells, then that probably wouldn't surprise you at all, and you'd just be able to focus on the gags that they're doing for everything and just be like, oh yeah, that is how that works. Oh, this is a good way to show that. So yeah, it kind of sets it up. It sets itself up for the best of both worlds, for people who already know about the content that's going on and people who don't know anything about the content. And I think that's really nice.
I think that's hard to do. When you see shows that are educational, it's usually towards the people who don't know what it is, and so it's kind of talking down to those people, but the show doesn't do that. It doesn't talk down to you as it's revealing this information.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, when a show can simultaneously impress the people who are experts in that field and also like do an excellent job of introducing concepts to people who don't know those things, I think that's a pretty admirable job.
And you can tell that they really took care to understand what the different job functions were, and to think about like, how can we explain this in a way that's not only like as accurate as we can get it, but also like amusing and works. And I think they do a really good job of balancing that.
There were two kind of quick things I wanted to touch on for general thoughts. One is, I had briefly mentioned earlier, like, there are a lot of kind of workplace animes. I think of something like Shirobako as an example. And a lot of those can kind of have the feel of like, oh, just another day back at the grind. And it's very like, you know, this is something we have to do and we don't always enjoy it, but we're here and we're going to make the best of it. And this is very much not that. These are people who are thrilled to be doing what they're doing. And it doesn't really feel like a job as much as they say it is. Because they constantly, like you said, the white blood cell, well, I'm just doing my job. I mean, thank you, I guess, or you're welcome. But the amount of care that the characters put into their function in the body is really fun and enduring. And I think, like you said, Kayla, it makes you care about that one red blood cell. Even though there are 30-something trillion other ones, she thinks that her job is so important that she's not going to just be like, well, I mean, the body will still be fine if I don't make my delivery today. I did just get attacked by a germ after all and almost died. But she's still so concerned about getting her route and figuring it out. And I think that kind of sets this apart from those kinds of anime and the typical workplace kind of thing you would see. The other thing I wanted to talk about is we had kind of alluded to how weird this world is, and how if you kind of think too hard about it, like the world starts to break down, and obviously that's not the point of this show. Josh mentioned before we started recording about this really pedantic review he read that was like, well, that wouldn't happen if this cell did this. And that's completely missing the point, obviously. But it's like, at the very start of the show, they say there are 37.2 trillion cells, and they're all working together to make this happen. But the scale of the show is so weird because you don't ever see 37 trillion things. You see the size of a city, and maybe not even like a huge city, just a city. And the red blood cell, despite there being 37 trillion people around her and living in this place, is able to get from one end of the world to the opposite end of the world within a day's travel or whatever. And likewise, the fact that these creatures have blood would indicate that maybe there's a world within them as well.
Yep.
So it's all ridiculous. And I think that kind of adds to both the aesthetic and the tone that the show is trying to fit into. And I think that makes for a really interesting case for all of the offshoots of this show and the manga that they've done so far. Because this is just one world, and this world is very different than another world in a different body. Which is why they've done things like the Cells at Work Black, which is about an unhealthy body. It's about like a smoker and somebody who drinks too much. And while that can kind of turn into the grimdark version of this show, I think it's really interesting that they could expand into a completely different world than the one that we've seen so far, with all these characters who are like happy and enjoying their lives and their jobs. And you could create a totally different world with the exact same concept. So I think that's pretty cool in the way that they've done world building for this show.
All right. So with all of this being said, Josh, would you watch more of this show?
Yes, I have.
Would you watch it again?
I have several times. Yes, I love this show. There's a couple episodes later on with titles like Hemorrhagic Shock that I have not watched yet, and that's also happens to be like the finale episode towards the end of the season. And yeah, I want to, and I probably will, but it's also still about biology stuff. And I don't know if I want to learn about hemorrhagic shock at all. But yes, as far as the quality of the anime and what I've watched so far, absolutely. I show this to everyone I know.
Colin, would you watch more of this show?
Likewise, as we've mentioned, we have completed the show before, and we were happy to watch these 4 episodes again. I think, especially, like you said, I'd flip around to a few of the episodes that I really enjoyed and would definitely watch those again. I desperately want to see the allergy episode again because it has one of my favorite characters and kind of the way that they play with that character's role in the body. So yeah, I love this show and I would definitely watch it more.
Yeah, I'm also on the same boat. I really got into this show like really quickly, and they recently announced that there is going to be a season 2. They haven't announced when it will be, but that a season 2 is on the way.
It's in production now.
Yeah, and I am ready.
Yeah, I was behind on that news, so I'm very excited that
Yeah.
there's going to be another
Surprise,
season. Yeah, woo!
Also, Aniplex! Aniplex. Come on.
Yeah, the Aniplex does the English dub, but you can only get it if you buy their very expensive DVDs.
Yeah, have fun paying $150 for 12 episodes.
But they have the intro song dubbed for free on YouTube. So at least watch that.
Yeah. Some of us still like to buy physical copies.
All right. Well, I think sadly this closes us out for this week. If you want to learn more about our show, you can visit our website at animonday.moe. That's animonday.moe. You can send us questions and comments to podcast@animonday.moe. And you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Our username is AniMondayCast, and you can find links for that on our website.
Thanks so much to Crunchyroll for all of the anime that you provide, and for the random button, which produces these wonderful and wonderfully terrible results. If you want to follow along with us each week, you can find a link to the current title on our website and social media, so that you can watch what we're watching. Finally, thanks to C2A for providing the intro and outro music for our show that come from the Senpai EPs available on Bandcamp and other major streaming services.
And also, thanks for Josh for coming in doing
Yeah,
this episode.
This was so much fun.
Yeah.
I'm glad y'all chose me for this one.
It was also really exciting because you actually got to come in to the studio to do it.
Yeah,
Yes.
This is our first three-way studio conversation.
Live and together.
Ready to roll?
I'm ready. Random button in 3, 2, 1. All right. The anime for this week is called DNA Squared.
And the first episode is called The Girl from the Future, Karen.
Karen. Always Karen.
I'm seeing something that says Mega Playboy.
I don't know what a mega playboy is.
Overpopulation is a serious problem. It all stems from the mega playboy who passes playboy DNA onto his 100 children, and who in turn had 100 children each. I might have to come back next week.
Josh is going to be a new regular on the show.
This looks incredible.
The original mega playboy. Wow, this looks incredible.
Oh, boy.
Hold on. Junta has a problem. He's deathly allergic to girls. All this changes with the arrival of Karen, a gorgeous time traveler who transforms him into the mega playboy, the sauciest girl magnet around.
Wait, is he still allergic even though he's a playboy?
It's just the Crunchyroll like blurb.
Oh, boy.
Oh, man.
Oh, man.
This
All
is
right.
something. All right, I think that's going to do it for us. Thank you all for joining us, and again, thanks to Josh for being here as our second guest on the show.
Also, you're welcome to come back anytime, Josh.
Anytime.
Yeah, just let me know. I'll be here.
All right, we'll see you next week.
Bye.
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 I had helper T cells. I don't know if you actually wanted to talk about
I
him.
had helper and memory T cell.
I like talking about helper because he looks like you, and that's what I think is funny.
Go for it.
That's my only comment is looks like Colin.
My only comment is always eating or just finished eating.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just like Colin. It's got the glasses and everything. This is my whole life.
I hope you know this is going to be the blooper reel.
Yeah, I'm aware.